I've made a video game. For those of you that don't know, there was a game jam held by a pretty popular gaming channel called Game Maker's Toolkit, in which a British man discusses game design in a way that makes you think he knows what he's talking about, as if that'll ever catch on. Let's talk game design. Just to recap, a game jam is a timed event in which a bunch of people make a game around a theme, fitting within set limitations. I've entered dozens of them, and given that the GMTKJam was probably the most entered event ever, coming in at 5,821 entries, obviously I also had to enter this one. There was only one problem. I'm an idiot. If you're subscribed to the channel, and if you're not then you should be, you might have seen a video I put out recently that was half an hour long, celebrating upcoming games from a whole bunch of incredibly talented people. This was my E3 Direct presentation, and it was a lot of work. Because I'm an idiot, I decided to make that video over a weekend to get it ready for the E3 Monday. That would be fine, were it not for the fact that the GMTKJam was also running over that weekend. Well done me. What that meant was by the time I was done with the Direct, I had considerably less time left to make a game for the jam. How much time, you ask? Well, the jam was 48 hours long, so let's take that and halve it. Now let's halve it again. And now, just for good measure, let's halve it one more time. That leaves us with, oh no, sorry, did you think I was done? No, halve it again. There we go. Yes folks, in the end I had just 3 hours to make and submit something, so this was going to be a challenge. Success in this game jam would come down to one very obvious game design principle that I think I've mentioned before: scope. In game design, the scope of your game is what you would expect it to have to be able to call it complete. Things like features, level count, soundtrack, options, everything that makes up a video game. This is not to say that this has to be forever, by the way. A good way of handling this if you're on a larger project is to think of what the game needs to have for you to be happy selling it to people. You can always add features later through free content updates and patches if you want. The scope is just everything you need to have day one to put it out into the world. Like a mother bird booting her child out of the nest, plummeting towards the cold, hard ground. Wholesome. Clearly, in 3 hours I had to bring my scope down as low as I could possibly go, which meant I had to think long and hard about what I actually wanted this game to have. Because it's a game jam, I had to adhere in some form to a theme. The theme for the GMTKJam was joined together. I, like many of the other 5,000 plus people who entered, immediately thought of some kind of rope system. Of course I did. So did you when I just said it. I immediately discarded that idea. I have this rule that when it comes to game jams, I always throw away the first idea that I have, because it's clearly too obvious and I probably can't do anything interesting with it. We're going to disregard the fact that in 3 hours I didn't have time to do anything interesting with anything at all, and we're going to move on. Now you might be thinking that making a polished game that I'm happy with in 3 hours is challenging enough for anyone, and you'd be wrong. I have another rule with game jams that what I like to do is set out something that I personally want the game to achieve. I do this because although game jams are often ranked and judged with winners and so forth, I don't tend to put a lot of stock into those results. The reason for this will be obvious to anyone who's ever entered a large game jam and gone through the playing and rating process after the submission date. Not to sound negative, as if that's ever stopped me before, but if you play a random selection of any game jam's entries, you'll soon come to realise that while all game jam entries are created equal, some are clearly more equal than others. This isn't a criticism, really, in fact it's a positive. I know that hundreds and maybe even thousands of people have used a game jam as a push-off point to create their very first video game, and to take their first steps down the path of game development. And that is brilliant, I support that entirely. Nobody expects those people to create polished, top quality experiences on their first try, or even their second, third or 10th attempt. It takes as long as it takes. Thing is, in the eyes of a game jam rating system, their vote is worth just as much as yours is, and if they're finding entries at random, you could end up in a situation where your game is being rated by 50 people who don't necessarily understand what goes into making a good game, while someone else gets 10 ratings from people who've watched every video on this channel and written a published thesis on good game design, which they've then celebrated with a TED Talk and by inventing and then winning the Nobel Prize for game design. So for the sake of my own sanity and ego, I have to set personal goals for game jam projects, because the results are going to be largely meaningless. And for this one, I wanted to accomplish not one but 2 different things. Like I said, 3 hours to make a game just isn't hard enough. The first personal goal was to make a simple puzzle game. It's something I've wanted to do for a while. I just always back out at the last minute because it seems like hard work. A simple puzzle game is something like Threes or Flow Free, something with a readily apparent gameplay mechanic that people can pick up and understand in seconds. These are deceptively hard to come up with because they require you to scale back your scope even harder than before to one key mechanic that can be utilised in interesting ways and made clearly obvious as soon as you start with them. The other goal was to basically steal a visual aesthetic from somebody else. Those of you who watch the Let's Talk Games Direct, and if you haven't then you should, might remember a game called Yin and Yang by Namida Sai. Namida is a close friend of the channel who hangs around in our Discord dispensing a surplus of wisdom and brilliance like some kind of wise mountaintop sage. He also has a masterful command of something we've come to call the Zen aesthetic. Simple geometric shapes paired up with an equally simple colour palette, artfully woven together to create something that is relaxing and familiar. The reason I wanted to borrow this aesthetic is that it looked pleasing, while hopefully being reasonably simple to create. To me, this felt like the perfect thing to adopt because it's basically just a bunch of shapes stitched together, with a palette that I could borrow from lowspec.com's palette list. Long-time viewers of the channel will know how much I struggle with actual art, possessing the artistic ability of a particularly talentless squid. So if I could find an art style that I could replicate with little effort or room to mess it up, that would be ideal. Hippity hoppity, your art style is my property. And so I am pleased to announce Sakura. Sakura is a Zen-themed real-time puzzle game in which you control multiple geometric shapes at the same time, trying to slot them into their respective holes. A bit like that block puzzle that babies have, but slightly more challenging. It fits the theme in a couple of ways. In a mechanical way, since the movement of every piece is joined together by invisible threads that force them all to move at the same time. And in a thematic way, since I created these little snippets of zen-like meditation, discussing what it means to be joined together in a deep and meaningful and incredibly pretentious way. It's also a nice simple puzzle game, where the player will immediately know what they have to do because I've used shape and colour to codify what is and isn't important, but where I can modulate the complexity through level design by adding points at which just following the basic instincts of movement will cause you to fail. That zen-like aesthetic I was talking about comes from a low-spec palette and the addition of a crumpled, paper-like background and some blurry drop shadows, giving the impression that the puzzles are all some kind of wooden block arrangement on top of some origami paper. And finally, the whole game is wrapped together in the name Sakura, which I think means cherry blossom, with a neat little cinematic level at the end that offers no challenge at all, but instead punctuates the experience with a kind of cinematic explosion of particles, making up cherry blossom leaves on a tree. Nice. It's very short, because as I might have mentioned I had 3 hours to hack it all together, but I think this works in its favour. It is shamelessly aping a Japanese style, and meaningful meditations are often short snippets of thought, rather than some novel-length rumination on what it means to be a leaf or whatever. Sometime after the jam ended, it occurred to me that what I should have done was written these little text snippets as haikus instead, but never mind. The basic mechanic could definitely be taken further with more hazards and things that modulate the experience, and I've spent a dangerous amount of time considering what a mobile port would look like, but I don't know if I've really got the time to take that on right now, so I suppose stay tuned to this channel to watch me sideline every other major project I'm working on to suddenly chase what is probably a bad idea. Like a dog running after a car down the motorway. I think I managed to accomplish everything I wanted. It definitely fits the aesthetic style, and I think the gameplay is simple enough that you can pick it up in seconds, even if there isn't quite room in this game to explore the mechanics as much as I'd have liked to. But really, what do you want from 3 hours? The link is in the description if you'd like to play it, and I might actually recommend that you do for this one, because I'm quite proud of it. Let me know what you think in the comments, and if you've liked this video, don't forget to like the video you liked since you liked it, and then subscribe for more videos like the one you liked because you liked it, and I'll see you the next time I'm thinking, hey, let's talk game design.